Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to continue our journey into how diffusion models work, but we're widening the scope. We're looking at the real cutting edge now, flow models.
That's right.
And if you're just joining us on this whole generative AI adventure, you should definitely check out our other tutorials. We break down all the fundamentals there,
Mm.
but you can absolutely jump right into this one because today we are talking about pure speed and, well, precision.
Yeah, that's really the core of it.
Our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the computational noise, literally,
Hmm.
and explain the really elegant mechanics of flow matching and rectified flow models. We need to understand not just what they are, but why they're suddenly outperforming the diffusion models we thought were state-of-the-art just a few months ago.
It's a huge leap.
We're looking for the straight path to understanding this technology.
Right. So to set the stage, let's just go back to the fundamental task of generative AI. This technology, it's creating everything from photorealistic images to custom videos. It's all fundamentally trying to solve one problem. How do you transform random, unstructured noise into a structured, meaningful object, which we'll call Zella? To do that, the AI has to learn to sample from this unknown data distribution.
And the way it
I
does
know,
this is
it-
through math.
Right. It's almost always by transforming that noise into data over time using differential equations, things like ODEs, ordinary differential equations, or SDEs.
Okay, so let's unpack that, because
Okay.
that's where the historical bottleneck has been.
Yeah.
Diffusion models, which gave us that first wave of just, stunning results. They work by defining a path that takes your clean data to noise.
The forward path.
And then they learn to invert that path, to go backwards. And that step-by-step reversal is why generation can feel so slow if you want high quality.
And that slowness isn't just, a minor inconvenience. It's fundamental to the math. And the question is, why is it slow?
Right.
It's slow because the path that these models traditionally define between your data and your noise, it's highly curved.
Yeah.
And to reverse a curved path accurately with a computer, you need many, many tiny steps.
It's like trying to navigate a winding river in reverse.
Exactly. You have to make constant, tiny corrections. And every single one of those steps requires a full evaluation from the neural network, which translates directly to high computational cost and long sampling times.
So this is where the big conceptual shift happens. And to rectified flow, or RF models,
Yeah.
what are they doing differently to solve this curvature problem? Are they just forcing it to be straight and losing quality?
That is the perfect question, and it really gets to the heart of the innovation. Rectified flows, they basically give up on that complex, curved path entirely.
Right.
Instead, they explicitly construct the forward process as a straight path, just a direct line between the data, $6 and lox, and a standard normal noise distribution, epsilon. The path is simply defined as 1 tvex plus tepsilon.
This is a linear interpolation.
It's a straight line. Imagine driving from point A to point B. A winding road needs a GPS that's constantly updating you, which is many steps. If the road is a straight highway, you only need a few checkpoints. Rectified flow forces the AI to learn the shortest, simplest path possible.
And that's where the efficiency gain comes from. Fewer steps needed to simulate the reversal.
That's the entire premise.
A straight path makes so much intuitive sense for speed, but as you pointed out, the training has to be really complex. You can't just draw a line and expect the model to follow it. So how did they figure out how to train the network to learn the specific, the velocity required to stick to that line?
It's a very elegant piece of math called flow matching. So to train the network to generate this velocity field, which we call O-target, that guides the noise toward the data, ideally what researchers want to do is calculate something called the marginal flow matching loss, or $.
And that's the average velocity across all possible starting data points.
Exactly. It's the perfect target.
So what's the catch? Why not just use that?
The catch is that it's mathematically intractable to compute directly. Because that marginalization, it involves calculating an expectation over the entire vast data distribution. It's like summing over an infinity of possibilities. You can't compute the average velocity of a million cars if you can't see all million cars at once.
So the ideal, true objective, LFMBIL, is impossible to actually calculate. How do you get around that?
You use a very clever trick. It's called the conditional flow matching loss, or LCFMBEL. And instead of trying to calculate the average velocity of all cars, LCFM just focuses on the specific velocity needed to get from one single data point, $6 to its corresponding noise sample, epsilon.
So if I'm hearing you right, they use the simple, easy-to-calculate objective, the speed of one car on its journey, to implicitly train for the super complex true objective, which is the average speed of all the cars.
That's it. That is the fascinating mathematical breakthrough here.
That seems almost too good to be true.
It is, but it's proven that minimizing the tractable conditional loss is mathematically equivalent to minimizing the intractable marginal loss. They only differ by a constant value, which, doesn't affect the gradient the network uses for learning.
Wow.
And the practical upshot of this is huge. You get a robust, simulation-free training objective. Traditional diffusion often requires these complex simulation methods to get accurate gradients. Flow matching is direct, it's clean, it's simple. It makes training much faster and more stable.
That really turns a complex problem into something much more feasible. But okay, even with this straight line objective, models usually train uniformly across all the time steps, right? From 2 equals 0 to 1. Does intuition suggest that some of those steps are just harder?
Absolutely. Think about that path again. At 2 equals 0, you have pure data. Easy. At t equals 1, you have pure noise. Also easy, it's just a Gaussian.
Right.
The really hard part is in the middle. Around t equals 0.5, the input is half data, half noise. It's blurry, it's ambiguous. That's where all the challenging structural information is. Those are the perceptually relevant scales the model has to get right.
So how did researchers adjust the training to focus on those difficult, blurry middle steps instead of wasting compute on the easy endpoints?
They introduced what they call tailored SNR samplers, specifically things like logit normal sampling. So instead of sampling time uniformly, which means you spend equal time on easy and hard stuff,
Right.
these samplers adjust the probability to sample those intermediate time steps much more frequently. It's like a student focusing all their study time on the hardest chapters of a textbook.
So it's basically fancy math for spend more time on the hard parts. Did it actually work? Did it translate into performance gains?
It did, dramatically. One specific variant, our flog norm, 0.00001.0, consistently got superior results. And what's critical is, because the rectified flow path is so clean, when you combine it with the smarter sampling, these models just shine when using very few steps.
How few?
They can get to competitive, high-quality images in as few as 5 inference steps, which vastly outpaces standard diffusion approaches that might need 20, 50, 100 steps for similar quality.
Okay, so speed is solved. The straight path is faster, especially with smart training. Now let's talk fidelity. A fast path to a bad image is, well, it's useless.
Right.
While the flow model fixed the speed problem on the math side, you still need a powerful engine to interpret the text prompt. And that engine is this new architectural innovation, the MMDIT.
A multimodal diffusion transformer, yes.
What's so special about it?
The MMDIT is fascinating because it really tackles that integration of text and image modalities head-on. It builds on a standard transformer, but it uses separate sets of weights for the image tokens and the text tokens.
Why separate them? Isn't a standard cross-attention mechanism, where text conditions the image, good enough?
Well, standard cross-attention often treats the text as this static thing that influences the image. It's a one-way street, kind of. The MMDIT, after using those separate weights, concatenates the image and text token sequences together for the full self-attention operation.
And what does that do?
It enables a crucial bidirectional flow of information. The evolving image patches and the text embeddings, which come from great encoders like CLIP and T5, they're allowed to inform each other during processing. The image doesn't just receive guidance, it sends structural feedback back to the text tokens.
Ah, so that deeper interaction is what really binds the image to the prompt. I know with older models, the main subject would look great, but if I asked for text, like a street sign, it was just gibberish. Is that where the MMDIT makes a difference?
Precisely. That improved semantic blend led to huge improvements in text comprehension, spatial reasoning, and critically, outstanding typography generation. The ability to render text correctly is a massive leap forward. It confirms the network truly understands the prompt at a much deeper level.
This level of complexity must demand a huge number of parameters. Did the research confirm what we've seen everywhere else in deep learning? That bigger is still better?
Absolutely, and it was reassuringly predictable. The research showed a clear scaling trend with no sign of performance saturation yet. They scaled these models up to 8 billion parameters. And the key metric they tracked that correlated with quality was simply validation loss.
A lower validation loss on a chart actually meant better pictures.
Yes, a lower validation loss strongly correlated with higher human preference ratings, which basically confirms that building these bigger, longer-trained models directly translates into outputs that real people find objectively better.
That's a powerful finding. But scaling up always brings new technical headaches. What was the hidden problem that they ran into when they tried to train these massive models at high resolution?
Instability. When using fast mixed precision formats, which you need for speed, the training loss would just occasionally diverge. Explode, really. The calculation was running away from itself.
So how did they fix that without giving up the speed benefits of mixed precision? For listeners who aren't deep in transformer math, what is attention logic growth instability? Is it like a runaway calculation?
That's a good way to put it. It's essentially a runaway calculation. Inside the attention mechanism, certain values can just explode because of how floating point numbers work, especially in mixed precision.
Okay.
They solved it with a small, very precise fix from vision transformer research called QK normalization. It just involves applying a type of normalization, RMS norm, directly to the query and key embeddings right before the attention operation.
And that stabilizes it.
It acts like a safety valve, it standardizes the inputs and prevents those internal values from diverging. And that little fix unlocked stable, efficient, high-resolution training at massive scale.
It's amazing how a tiny technical detail can enable so much progress. And circling back to efficiency, they also saw that their biggest models, the 8 billion parameter ones, actually needed fewer sampling steps to reach peak quality than the smaller ones. That feels counterintuitive. Why?
It really speaks to the synergy of the whole system. The researchers attribute it to the fact that the bigger models are just better at fitting that straight path objective of rectified flow. If the vector field it learns is almost perfectly straight, and the model is super confident about the required velocity, you just need fewer steps to walk that line accurately. The biggest models are simply the best navigators. They need the fewest pit stops.
So finally, let's connect all this back to practical generation. You, the listener, you type in a complex prompt. A swamp ogre with a pearl earring standing next to a vintage rocket in the style of Vermeer. How do these models make sure the final image sticks so tightly to that specific text?
This relies on a technique called classifier-free guidance, or CFG, which these flow models integrate perfectly. During the MMDT's training, it's sometimes shown the actual text prompt.
The Vermeer one.
Right, and it's sometimes shown an empty or null prompt. This forces the network to learn two different things at the same time, the guided vector field and the unguided one.
So it learns what to do with the prompt and what to do with no prompt at all.
Exactly. Then, when it's time to generate an image, you can use both of those predictions. You calculate the difference between the guided and the unguided direction, and then you extrapolate that difference with a guidance weight. You're effectively telling the model, go much farther in the direction the prompt is pulling you.
And that's what makes the conditioning so strong.
It significantly reinforces the effect, leading to those highly specific, prompt-adherent images we expect today.
So, if we put this all together, the results are pretty clear. We have rectified flow, providing this incredibly efficient straight path, getting state-of-the-art results in just a handful of steps.
5 to 10 steps, yeah.
And then we have the MMDIT architecture, which deeply understands text prompts and generates images with unprecedented fidelity. It's even solving long-standing problems like typography. This whole synergy is pushing text-to-image synthesis past its old limits.
And it's achieving results that are competitive with, or even superior to, many of the big closed-source models. What's so potent is the reliability of the scaling. The data clearly shows that building these models bigger and training them longer it predictably yields better results according to humans.
It's like we found a scalable, stable, and incredibly fast blueprint.
For the next generation of generative AI, absolutely.
So we've seen that the choice of the path between data and noise is critical. The straight line just wins on efficiency. But that leads to a final thought. If the validation loss for these huge models keeps decreasing so smoothly with more scale and compute, we have to ask, how long until we hit the practical limits of photorealism and control that are defined by the training data itself and not by the model architecture anymore?
When does the map become as good as the territory it's based on?
Exactly. That question about the ceiling being the data itself, that's something worth exploring next time.